New government data shows the U.S. economy is gaining momentum. The economy grew 2.9% in the fourth quarter of 2017. That caps the strongest 9-month stretch in more than 12 years.
David Rubenstein is co-founder and co-executive chairman of the Carlyle Group, one of the world's largest private equity firms. His firm manages a total of $195 billion with a B across 317 investment vehicles all around the world. Before getting into business, you should know he served in President Jimmy Carter's administration. David, welcome to the
My
table.
pleasure to be here.
It's always good to see you. We'll talk about business in a second, but I am curious about your thoughts about, business, politics, you've been in the White House. What is your take on what's happening in Washington these days from a business point of view and a political point of view?
Well, the business community, I think, is generally satisfied that the tax cuts have gone through. The business community is pleased with those generally. Obviously, there's some things that they would prefer to be different than came out in the final bill. But generally, I think people in the business community were happy with the tax cuts. They wouldn't be the tax cuts that I might have proposed myself. I think it was probably more favorable to people in my income bracket than everybody. I think we do have an income inequality problem and a social mobility problem. That bill wasn't designed to deal with that. But I think generally the economy is in reasonable shape. It's what I call global synchronous happiness. Everybody's happy right now.
Yes.
Should
we worry when everybody's happy?
Well, that's the big concern. When everybody's happy, you have to be worried, because when things look perfect, sometimes they don't turn out to be that way. So sometimes there's going to be something hidden a bit. I don't think there's a cheetah behind me or something,
Yes.
There's no doubt that there's something lurking behind us. Now, we've had about 104 straight months of economic growth. That's the third longest in our history. At some point, the economic cycle will go down. I don't know if we're prepared for it yet. My biggest worries about the economy are these. While I think it's in very good shape now, and I think we'll have probably 2.5% growth this year, low unemployment, low inflation. At some point, it will end. And when it ends, I want to make sure we're prepared for it. I do worry about the amount of debt we have. We have $21 trillion of federal debt. That's a lot of debt. I do worry about the income inequality problem. It's getting worse. Social mobility is getting worse. And I do worry about another problem we haven't talked about a lot, which is literacy. People in our country are not able to read very much. 14% of our people in this country, adults, are functionally illiterate. They can't read beyond the 4th grade level. Right. If you have an increasing percentage of high illiteracy, you're not going to be able to ever solve this income inequality problem. So that's something we really need to work on.
The Carlyle Group has investments in China. Are you worried about a potential trade war with China?
I'm not, because I think that the relationship is so strong that I don't think we're going to really have a trade war. It's not in anybody's interest. So there have been some disputes on tariffs and so forth, but I don't think it's going to upset this enormous relationship. We are a gigantic investor in China. We'll continue to be a gigantic investor in China. It's the biggest economy in the world by purchase price parity measurement, and by GDP, it will be in our lifetime the biggest economy in the world. So if you're an investor in the global economic world, you really should be in China. You
got to be there.
Yeah, but the Chinese President Xi Jinping has consolidated power. They're our biggest threat, the United States' biggest threat. There's been a lot of talk, though, that there might be retaliation on this trade front.
Well, first, I don't think they're our biggest threat. You might say economically, but our biggest threat really, I think, comes from Russia or from global terrorism. That's our biggest threat. But in terms of China as an economic power, yes, they are competing with us. But Xi Jinping has done a pretty good job, I think, of working with President Trump. I think they figured out how to have a reasonably good relationship. And I think Xi Jinping's relationship with the North Korean president seemed to have done wonders in terms of getting the thing moving forward. I don't know why we are able to have a discussion with North Korea, as it appears we will be able to. But if we do come together and have a talk with North Korea, between the president and the head of North Korea, I do think that would be a positive thing, and I think China deserves some credit for that.
You look at the front page of the Financial Times today, and it talks about, of course, the FANGs, the tech stocks,
yes,
all dropping. Are we having a reckoning now in terms of this? Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt that our economy is very influenced now by these large technology companies, and when you ever have so much power, there is going to be some reverberation. But the interesting thing about that, these are American companies. And the main thing that's been interesting to me is that no company outside the United States has really been able to build this kind of global technology presence. So I think it's very good for us that we're able to do this. There is obviously some concern in Europe and China about the impact of these companies on their economies and their culture. But right now, as Americans, I think they're pretty good for us.
What do you think of the president's choice of Larry Kudlow as his top economic advisor? You've said you think generally the team is good. It's not Alexander Hamilton, you said, probably not, but generally it's good.
Well, Alexander Hamilton had the advantage of having a play written about him, and I don't know if Larry Kudlow is going to have a play written about him, but maybe if he does, he'll be well regarded as well. Larry Kudlow is obviously a very experienced person. He worked in the Reagan administration. He knows Washington quite well, so I think he deserves a very good chance to show what he can do. These are not easy jobs in the White House. This is a job that didn't exist when I was there. They didn't have a national economic coordinator. That didn't start until President Clinton, when Bob Rubin invented the job, more or less. It's a tough job, but I think Larry Kudlow is well prepared for it.
Well, David Shulkin, as you know, is no longer there, and he's not going quietly. He said the environment in Washington is toxic, chaotic, disrespectful, and subversive. Do you think that that's an accurate take? You know, you're somebody that has bipartisan dinners with members of Congress. Would you agree with his assessment of how it's working in Washington these days?
If I had just lost my job, I might say that as well. But
do you think it's just sour grapes, David?
Well, I don't know if it's sour grapes. I don't know him, so I can't really say. I would just say right now the atmosphere in Washington is not what it was when I was there in the 60s and the 70s. At that point, people from the Democratic side and the Republican side did work together to try to get bipartisan legislation. That rarely happens today. I've started a series of dinners to try to bring Democrats and Republicans together, talking about American history and things we can agree on.
Do they eat well together?
They do, and they actually like to sit with each other. There's no press there, so nobody can see that they're actually sitting and talking to each other from people from the opposite party. But I do think there is a desire on part of Democrats and Republicans to come together, but obviously the atmosphere right now doesn't lend itself to that very well.
Do you ever invite the president to those dinners?
Well, these are for members of Congress, but I'm sure if the president wanted to come, I'm sure he'd be welcome.
David Rubenstein,
Always
thanks so
good to
much.
see you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Morning.
Thank you.